Yeah, so on both my 8-bit battle videos for Commando and Ikari Warriors, I got a fair few comments suggesting that although both games were good home ports of their arcade counterparts, both were not as good as another game by the software powerhouse Alligata Software, mysteriously called Who Dares Wins 2. Now, as you may all be aware, I'm very much a Speccy boy at heart, and I very much remember and played Who Dares Wins 2 quite a bit, and recently picked it up in a bundle of games that came with my newly acquired Spectrum Plus 2. At no point though do I recall playing Who Dares Wins 1. I mean, did it even exist? And if not, why not? Well, the answer to that question is quite complicated, so let's have a brief history lesson. In the early 1980s, Mike and Tim Mahoney owned and ran a computer shop in Sheffield called Superior Systems, based in what is now an empty university building in West Street, Sheffield. It is here that two schoolboys, Tony Crowther and Steve Evans, started working on Saturdays selling computers. They showed Mike and Tim some games they had been working on, and so it was that Alligata Software was born in an attempt to sell some of these games. Tony had some success and later went on to work out of another computer shop in Sheffield for what would be a bigger player in the industry, Gremlin. Steve meanwhile stayed at Alligata and set about writing a clone of the extremely popular 1985 Capcom game Commando. Originally called Death or Glory and then later renamed to Who Dares Wins, the Commodore 64 version of the game was pretty much complete, or complete enough, by autumn of 1985 to send out to magazines for review and to showcase at computer trade shows. It was at this point that Elite Systems got wind of the game and were instantly annoyed at the similarities it had to their soon to be released home port versions of Commando that they had paid Capcom to license. So, what annoyed them?
I'm angry.
Well, if we look at Elite's Commodore 64 port of Commando next to Who Dares Wins, there are plenty of similarities. The main character sprites are very similar. There's bridges, bunkers, and the end of level gate attacks are pretty close to the mark. I mean, even the end of level text is stupidly similar. Steve was unashamedly making a Commander clone, which a few years prior would have gone unnoticed, but with software companies paying good money to license the big arcade games, those days were clearly over. Elite obviously slapped an injunction on the game, so it was pulled from the limited shelves it had made it onto, and that was the end of Steve's Commando clone. Or was it? Determined to put the game out and keep Elite happy, Steve went about changing the game enough so it wasn't an obvious rip-off, and try and release it before Christmas 1985, which I presume was a pivotal sales period with Commando still afresh in everyone's mind. With the original game already reviewed and made aware of, why not just go straight for a sequel approach and call the newly updated game Who Dares Wins 2? I mean, you could argue the 2 stands for version 2, so it makes sense to me. On the original versions of the new game, the writing credit is given to Tommy Atkins, which is actually the name given to a generic British soldier primarily in the First and Second World Wars when it was shortened to just Tommy's. Now, was this Steve making sure his tracks were firmly covered? I respect it. No ambiguous wording at the end of the levels either, so what else did he change? Well, without showing off too much before we compare the big 3 micros shortly, we can see from the outset our main character is in fact wearing a fetching red number. Gone are the Commando-esque hills and bushes, those have been replaced with ruined buildings. We get supply drops, POWs getting executed, planes, boats, trains, and plenty of action. This all appeared to be enough of a difference for Elite, so other ports of Who Dares Wins 2 went ahead. Tynesoft were given the Atari 8-bit and Commodore 16 ports with, varying degrees of success. The Atari version looks okay, a little confusing working out which one of the same dressed chaps on screen is you, but otherwise a pretty decent version. The Commodore 16 version just feels like they took on too much. Just look at the speed of the thing. The MSX version just looks like a really good Speccy version, that's lovely. And finally, my favourite use of the colour palette available goes to the BBC Micro. I mean, how much red is too much red? Alright then, so what about the big three? Who had the best version between the CPC, ZX Spectrum and the Commodore 64? Well, we're going to start with the OG, the Commodore 64 version, and the menu screen is all but identical except for the funny credit for Tommy Atkins. We are straight into the action, and already I understand the appeal over Commando on the same system. This is slower, which actually is a good thing. With it not being so frenetic, you feel like you have more of a chance to tactically avoid certain routes or baddies to move on to the next section. And that movement is very nicely done, with smooth scrolling that works nicely with the pace of the game. Good bright bullets are easily seen, and the first level offers enough of a challenge that means it takes a few goes to understand the patterns, but always remains a decent enough challenge. It seems shooting a lot helps as your bullets take out the enemy ones, which is handy, although like the other versions here, accidental grenade lobbage is definitely a thing. I would say out of the three versions, this one is the easiest, certainly for these initial stages, which again I like as I get frustrated rather quickly with games these days that kill me too easily. The sound is alright, I mean there's no in-game music, but that's honestly fine. The explosions etc. sound okay. As for magazines, well, Zap Magazine, what am I doing? As for the magazines, Zap Magazine really enjoyed it, giving it 90% and basically praising it for its addictive qualities. Right, me old Speccy next, and core blimey Charlie, the old beeper is pumping out the Great Escape theme like nobody's business, which is kind of offensive. A better menu though, with the ability to redefine keys or use the joystick, which is always nice to have, and then off we go. Now, this is a tricky one. As a standalone Spectrum game, it's pretty damn good. It's fast, but not too fast. Heaps of fun, and definitely up there alongside Commando and Ikari Warriors. But, and it's a big but, compared to the other two micros here, the colour clash that sometimes really hampered Spectrum games really lets this one down. Some things are so bad they just look like a jumbled mess. I mean, look at the state of this train, for example. It's just a flashing red shit on wheels. It's a shame because the colour clash really does detract from what is otherwise a quality game. That, well, gameplay wise competes with the other two just fine. It could maybe be just a tad slower like the Commodore one and therefore easier, and the gravel stone effect on the floor does make seeing bullets a little tricky at times. It also doesn't scroll like the Commodore version, which is a shame, but all in all it's a lovely game that only looks disappointing compared to the more powerful micros it was up against. Now, magazine reviews were mixed on this one, so we're going to go down the middle with Your Sinclair, who only gave it 5 out of 10. They were bemoaning that it plays too much like a poor conversion from another home micro, and they also hated the accidental grenade lobbage too. So what about Amstrad CPC users then? Well, firstly, I do be liking the alligator logo before the main menu that has a rather jolly rendition of the Great Escape tune. Straight in, and it's, well, pretty close to the Commodore one in more vibrant colours, although the sprites are definitely a little bit more blocky in appearance. No scrolling again, which is a shame, but gameplay is just as good as the other two I reckon, with Amstrad users not getting shortchanged here with some dodgy Spectrum port. Definitely more on par with the Spectrum one over the Commodore one as it runs just a bit quicker, but it still has tons of replay value and like the others gives you that just one more go feeling. Once again, I can see why folks prefer this to Commando or Ikari Warriors, as I think I do here on the CPC. Amstrad Action gave it an AA Rave Award, whatever that means, at 83%, just criticising spawn points when you die and having to return to the start of the screen. I mean, come on. Well, I'd like to ham it up and try and create an air of suspense, but you all know who has won, right? Yes, of course, it's the ZX Spectrum. Yeah, I'm just kidding. That was just for David Plays Retro Games Badly. For everyone else, it was, of course, the Commodore 64. Easy choice. I mean, it scrolls for a start. It's slightly slower, but that actually makes it better, and it really looks the business. Not great sound, but hey, you can't have it all, eh? The CPC is next, but to be honest, if the Speccy version scrolled, it might have pipped it, but as they both don't, and the CPC version is graphically heads and shoulders above the Speccy one, it's got to be second. So that means the poor old Speccy is third again. So here is the leaderboard after 10 rounds, people. Remember, 3 points for a win, 2 for second and 1 for third. So we have 18 points for the Spectrum after 10 games, 20 for the CPC and 23 for the Commodore 64, which is starting to stretch its lead. So let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this game and if you agree with my placings. Not you, Dave. And as always, I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching and bye for now. God, I got them in the wrong order, didn't I? Cheers, everyone.